Holy City Center Radio is episode 169, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, September 8th, 2023. Hope you all had a great week. It is hot as I am recording this. The last few days have been very, very hot. It's been a rude awakening coming back to Charleston after enjoying some mild weather out in Washington State over this past weekend. But glad to be back here, getting caught up on Holy City Center work. Had over 1,000 emails awaiting me. I tried to plug away a little bit while I was away, but just couldn't, between travel and wanting to do fun things and just enjoying my vacation, I obviously got a little behind. So it's been a busy couple of days. I think I'm under 200 emails now, but lots and lots of posts to get up and things. So you can expect plenty of news to be coming out on the website. But regardless, you should be visiting the website because it's Friday. You go to holycitycenter.com/events, or just go to the main page and look for the weekend events posts that I try to keep up there throughout the weekend. That'll help you find something to do on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and for that matter, beyond, as the events list is for every single day. But most people are looking for things to do on the weekend, which is why I'm highlighting it on Friday's show as usual. Whatever you do, stay cool out there, have fun, be safe, and just enjoy everything the city has to offer. No other updates really going on here. As I mentioned, just been busy with work and things. I have some exciting announcements coming about the future of Holy City Center and some partnerships I'm working on, but not for this episode because we've got a lot to get caught up on. So without any further delay, let's get into the latest news. All right, the story I teased on the last episode is going to be our first story. The South Carolina Department of Education will no longer partner with the South Carolina Association of School Libraries. This actually happened last week, but as we've mentioned, it got a little backed up on work, so I'm just able to talk about it now. So you may have heard this story, but here's the breakdown of what's going on. State Superintendent Ellen Weaver announced a split in an August 25th letter that was addressed to Michelle Spires, the president of the School Librarians Group. The Education Department will directly communicate with school librarians and media specialists, Weaver wrote in that letter, but has formally ended all partnerships with the SCASL effective immediately. Weaver, who is a Republican that was elected back in November, said the break was a result of the organization's, quote, continued lack of discernment, end quote, in response to parents raising issues with educational materials. Yes, this is all part of the current culture wars we've been dealing with, where a group of parents are trying to remove books, ban books, censor books in the name of, quote, parental rights, end quote. I say that because it's ridiculous. Parents have always had rights when it comes to what their kids are taught in school. They've always had access to what their kids are being taught, what books are available in the library. It's just become, as I mentioned, one of the popular culture wars of the moment, where they try to ban and censor books under that guise of, oh, it's inappropriate material. Now, don't get me wrong. I have heard some stories, read some stories where there are some books that even me, pretty liberal, hey, let people do what they want to do. What's the big deal? We shouldn't be banning books. That's kind of what I feel. But look, I get it. There are some materials that parents may object to their children having access to. And I've heard of some books where, I was a little surprised to say, oh, this was in an elementary school library. But at the same time, most of the complaints are not really well thought out. There's been some examples of, there's some silly book about an animal who at one point the term they is used, and a parent said, oh, it says they, that is this gender, studies, ideology pushing on children, pronouns. And it putting aside the fact, even if it was using they in that manner, the book was actually using the word they because they were talking about multiple people. And so this parent who had this objection didn't even read the book, was just looking for something to try to yell about, and it wasn't even accurate. So we've seen things like that. We've seen them get upset about, and it's almost always books relating to the LGBTQ community or any other minority group you can think of. It's almost never anything about heterosexual relationships, or anything involving books that are predominantly about white people. you know, it's most of the time these objections are ridiculous. So that's what's going on here. And a lot of this that I'm talking about in this story, I mean, honestly, you can go look into it yourself. Of course, there's a link in the show notes, but it's a lot of BS coming from Weaver and those who back her. So she cited cited testimony given by Tamara Cox, who is the SCASL's previous president, to the state's teacher recruitment and retention task force as one way the school librarians group has undermined the partnership between educators and parents. In that testimony, Cox shared the story of multiple school librarians working across the state who she said had experienced threats and harassment related to attempts to censor materials. Weaver also pointed to an August 9th letter that the organization had sent to the South Carolina School Boards Association, in which the school librarians group expressed alarm at the growing number of attempts to ban and censor materials. The group wrote about lessons to be learned from incidents in Forsyth County, Georgia, where the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights found that school district's removal of books had potentially created a hostile environment in violation of the students' civil rights. So basically, Weaver's pointing to nothing to claim that they're downplaying parents' concerns. No, Superintendent Weaver, the examples you mentioned showed that the organization was concerned about threats and harassment they were getting, and the fact they were concerned that books were being banned and there was censorship. It didn't say that they weren't going to listen to parents' concerns. It didn't say we are never going to remove they were just concerned about the current movement. That's it. How is that grounds to say they're not taking things seriously? It's ridiculous. This was part of the plan all along. Any kind of scapegoat they can have and claim that these organizations are bringing woke ideology, which they can't even define, into schools. And that's not at all what's going on here. It's just ridiculous. And on top of that, the SCASL board wrote a letter in response to Weaver's. That letter was dated August 31st, and it said that they had asked to meet with the state superintendent to discuss her concerns and improve communication. The group highlighted how it was collaborated with state education department for the last 50 years, over 50 years actually, from hosting town hall meetings to assisting in updating and developing state standards for school library resource collections. The board even wrote that they believe parents have the right to raise concerns and ask questions. So again, she's pointing to things that don't demonstrate at all what she claimed it was. Despite that, the library group said, hey, we want to meet with you. We want to discuss these things. We've also have been taking parents' concerns seriously, and we have allowed the community to voice their concerns in multiple ways. And they cited those, like I mentioned, the town hall and etc. It's a bunch of BS from Weaver. They just want a scapegoat to say that there's proof. So we had to fire them. Look, and they're bringing in these liberal views to indoctrinate our children when none of that is going on at all. Jace Woodrum, who is the executive director of the ACLU of South Carolina, in relation to the story, decided that they're going to criticize Weaver for not reaching out to the school librarians group before announcing this split, and accused the state superintendent of playing political games. 100% I agree, if that wasn't clear already. She didn't even try to talk to this group. The group wanted to talk to her. There was never the plan. As Woodrum said, this was clearly political games. This is something the state superintendent, I know that it's silly to me that this is a partisan role. We should not have Republican and Democratic state superintendents. This should just be a job that goes to the best person. And and sure, you want to have an election, fine, but why is this based on party? It just leads to stuff like this, where they can lean into these culture wars in hopes that they will, remain in this role and their backers will continue to back them. It's insane. And it's just going to make the South Carolina public school system here even worse than it already is when you compare it nationally. And yes, I know we have some really great schools here doing good work, but on the whole, the state is not good when it comes to education. And these ridiculous culture wars are just getting in the way of improving our schools. This will not improve our schools. Banning books doesn't make things better. Cutting ties with groups that they've worked with for over 50 years, although, hey, that stuff like this happens, but for this reason is ridiculous. And Weaver basically did it with claims that are completely made up and are nonsensical. And it's just incredibly disappointing, but not at all surprising to see. All right. Sticking in the political landscape, we will have a runoff after no one received 50% of the vote in a state Senate district race. State Representatives Wendell Gilliard and Dion Tedder led that special Democratic primary for the Charleston area's Senate District 42 seat, carrying about 47%, that was Gilliard, and 39%, that was Tedder. And an outcome that now will send the race to a runoff that will happen on September 19th. With all precincts reporting on September 5th, State Representative J.A. Moore was in a distant third place with 15% of the vote, so he will not be part of the runoff. How the runoffs work, if no one gets over 50% of the vote, so a majority, it has to go to a runoff with the top two people moving on. So we will have that, as I mentioned, on September 19th. One disappointing thing about this was that turnout was awful, as the Post and Courier described it, anemic, with only 7.5% of the district's 53,000 registered voters actually going to the polls. So extremely disappointing, but not surprising. A lot of these, you know, special elections, when someone retires or what have you, and primaries in general, then just don't do that well, especially when there's no, if there's not like a presidential election going on as well, or something higher up on the ballot. The turnout's always low, but that's less than 10%. That's really, really poor. So for those who don't know, this special primary was required because earlier this year, Senator Marlin Kimpson, who is a Democrat, resigned from the seat to take a job with the Biden administration. So that is why we had this special election. So obviously now we know it'll either be Gilliard or Tedder who will move on to the general election, where they will face a Republican whose name is Rosa Kay, but she's also known as Roseman Camara. She is the only Republican to file in the race. So the winner of this runoff on September 19th will go head to head with her. It's the family that does not leave the news, although this time it's not their own doing. Yes, that's right, the Murdaugh family, of course. Normally it's something going on with a court case is what I'm talking about, but now we have a movie on the way. You knew it was happening. There's already been a ton of documentaries and special episodes of shows like Dateline in 2020 and all that. Well, now we have a movie. Murdaugh Murders, the movie, will air on the Lifetime Network. It's going to be a two-part movie event taking place on October 14th and 15th. Bill Pullman will actually star as Alex Murdaugh. You may know Pullman from all the movies he's been in over the years. Some of the more popular ones include While You Were Sleeping, Independence Day, Casper, and of course the comedy classic Spaceballs. Playing Alex's wife Maggie will be Lauren Robick, and son Paul is going to be played by an actor by the name of Curtis Tweedy. So recently, in addition to this movie, Netflix also announced that it'll add 3 more episodes to its Murdaugh Murders: A Southern Scandal series. So if you just can't get enough of this case, which it seems many people can't, you're going to have all sorts of new content to watch here shortly. So again, Netflix adding on to that Murdaugh Murders series they had, and then Lifetime will have this 2-part movie starring Bill Pullman. I'm not sure. I'll probably end up watching the movie because I consume everything involving Charleston, South Carolina news, even if it's something I might not necessarily be super into, just because people are talking about it. So I'm sure I will be talking about it in the future. I'm sure I'll watch it. Maybe not. We'll see. But I'm sure plenty of you out there will. And I'll be happy to hear your feedback on all of these series, or if you're just sick and tired of it, which I think some people are. But they wouldn't be coming out with these if there wasn't a market for it. That's for sure. Our last story involves the John C. Calhoun statue, which I did not think we'd still be talking about this. But there is a court case going on. You may not have known about it. It's kind of flown under the radar. The future of that monument is now in the hands of a state circuit court judge after both sides in this legal fight presented their arguments for more than an hour earlier this week. The lawsuit is the latest in a series of legal maneuvers that a bunch of different groups have filed in hopes of reinstating the statue to public display in some capacity. For those who don't remember, the monument was torn down after standing in Marion Square for over 100 years. Um, there were some claims that this would violate the Heritage Act. The city of Charleston said it did not. And basically, the statue has sat in storage ever since. The city has been open to any museum that would want to take the statue and displaying it in their halls, but none have come forward. The Charleston Museum, I think, is the only one that outright said we can't take this statue, and they gave several reasons, none of which having to do with Calhoun's background as a someone who was involved in human trafficking. Enslaved people, and was just an all-around terrible person because of those, of course. Yes, I know, different times, blah blah blah. But a lot of us don't think we should be celebrating people like that with statues. And that's why it came down finally. And no one seems to really want to take it as far as museums and things. So these groups are suing, saying that it needs to be on public display. Meanwhile, attorneys representing the city requested that Judge Jennifer McCoy dismiss the case. She did not. She will issue a ruling in some capacity at a time that has not been announced. Court arguments on September 6th touched briefly on Calhoun's legacy, but largely centered on whether the statue was taken down legally and what recourse plaintiffs have to see it reinstated in Marion Square in downtown Charleston. Suing are a group of Calhoun descendants and the Ladies Calhoun Monument Association, as well as current members of the Board of Field Officers of the 4th Brigade. This stuff cracks me up. It's so lame. Which is a historic militia formerly called the Washington Light Infantry Sumter Guards and is recognized as the original owners of Marion Square. These militias crack me up. Historically, they serve some sort of purpose. Now, we're talking well before any of our times, but these groups have kind of hung around, and it's this group, when I looked into them, when they were known as the Washington Light Infantry Sumter Guards, they had a website up, and their members were a bunch of crusty old white men. What kind of militia are you? It basically seems like it's just like a social group of some kind, where they probably sit around and cry and complain and talk about how much they miss the good old days. Uh, it's so lame. It's so lame to me. There's like cosplaying old men who think there's some sort of militia. It's ridiculous. So it's hilarious and sad at the same time. Toward the end of his argument, the plaintiff's attorney, Bill Connor, said that the initial decision to take the statue down was made hastily amid an isolated period of social unrest and that it should be revisited. So basically arguing, hey, this happened after, in light of the murder of George Floyd. At the time, death, now we know murder. And said that, emotions were high and the city made a hasty decision and we should revisit this. It wasn't really that hasty of a decision. It moved quickly, but this is something that has been discussed amongst residents and people in the city government for a while. What are our options? Do we recognize these people who had horrific pasts in the way they treated other people? Should we have statues and things named after these people? So it wasn't that hasty at all. Again, it's something that had been discussed for a while, and they had a plan and they had talking points ready to go. When it when people were, but the Heritage Act in the city was like, well, no, we don't think it applies for this and this and this. And you can go back and revisit all that if you want all the details. But yeah, this is it's so sad and ridiculous. Imagine being a person who is so upset that the Calhoun monument came down that you want to sue the city and want them to put it back in Marion Square. What? How sad is your life that this is the cause that you want to take up? This is the hill you want to die on. You want a statue that was removed, put back up because for some reason you want to celebrate. Yes, I know. Someone who is important to the state's history, to the country's history, but was also not just someone who enslaved people, not just someone who was outwardly racist, and likely many other I'm sure, but that's the most prominent one. But one that was so vocal about slavery that he said it was a good. He said it was a good thing. Not even like, well, maybe it's not did even had nothing. Just it was a good. You want so badly to celebrate that person and that you want a statue dedicated to him back up, and you're suing over it? That is pathetic. It is sad and pathetic. I know none of those folks are listening to this podcast, but if you are, it's sad. You are sad and pathetic. It's a statue dedicated to a racist monster in our city's history, in our country's history. And you want it up there so badly, you're suing over it? Good Lord. I can't express how ridiculous that is. Pathetic. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Hopefully I have sufficiently offended any Calhoun defenders out there. No apologies, no takebacks. You were sad and pathetic. Who's not the folks listening to this podcast? You all are great. Thanks so much for listening. I really, really appreciate all of your support. Please review, subscribe, like, rate, whatever you can do for this podcast on the streaming platform you're currently listening on. Just go ahead and do that. It's a big help to me, and I appreciate the people who have been leaving star ratings and reviews. I've seen those. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. If you want to go that extra mile and help out with Holy City Center, you can go to holycitycenter.com/shop where you can pick up some merchandise, or go to patreon.com/holycitycenter where you can sign up for one of those support tiers. I want to thank Cole Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this episode, and Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. Have an amazing weekend. Stay cool, stay safe, have fun. Go to holycitycenter.com/events to see what's going on around town. And I'll talk to you all on Monday. But until then, good night and good luck.